Good morning, everyone. It's my honor to be here today representing AT&T and honoring so many veterans in this room today who have served our country with honor and with dignity. For more than 85 years, AT&T has remained dedicated to supporting active military personnel, their families, and veterans. It is now my distinct honor to introduce today's guest speaker and honoree, Paul Buddy Bucha. Mr. Bucha is a Vietnam veteran and recipient of the Congressional Medal of Honor, the highest award that is given to a military personnel. Buddy Bucha graduated academically in the top 2% of his West Point class, number 2 in Military Order of Merit, and a 2-time All-American and captain of the swim team. Immediately upon graduation from West Point, Buddy attended the Stanford University Graduate School of Business, receiving his MBA in 1967 and completing his airborne and ranger training between academic years. After Stanford, Buddy reported for duty with the 101st Airborne Division at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, to prepare for deployment in Vietnam's Operation Eagle Thrust. On March 16, 1968, Captain Bucha was the commanding officer of a reconnaissance in-force mission that was inserted by helicopter near Binh Dong province, whose mission was to locate and destroy enemy strongholds. When his men were pinned down by heavy machine gun fire, he crawled 40 meters through a hail of enemy fire to single-handedly destroy the bunker with grenades. Though wounded, upon seeing his unit's perimeter was about to be overrun, he ordered a withdrawal while providing cover fire. At one point during the night, he ordered his men to play dead while he brought in friendly fire on the enemy. Buddy stood in full view of the enemy with a flashlight to direct the evacuation of 3 helicopters carrying the most seriously wounded from the field of battle. For his actions, Captain Bucha received, among other decorations, the Bronze Star, the Purple Heart, and the Medal of Honor. Upon his return to the U.S., he reported for assignment as Assistant Professor of Managerial Economics at West Point. After resigning his Army commission in 1972, Buddy joined H. Ross Perot as a special assistant and later moved to the Perot-owned Electronic Data Systems as a Senior VP of International Operations, expanding operations throughout the Middle East and Europe. In 1978, Buddy formed his own international consulting company, which expanded to include real estate development, building the environmentally acclaimed development at Port Liberté on the New York Harbor. Currently, Buddy is owner and CEO of the villas at Cocoa Reef, the first environmentally certified residential project for energy and environmental design on the world-renowned Elbow Beach in Bermuda. Buddy is actively involved in national security and veterans issues with the Obama administration and was an advisor to candidate Obama during his 2008 campaign. Buddy is a frequent lecturer to military leaders of all branches on honor and leadership. Buddy has served as a board member and officer of the Fisher House Foundation and Intrepid Fallen Heroes Fund, which support military families and wounded warriors. Buddy is active in a variety of veteran organizations, including the American Legion, the U.S. Army Ranger Association, the Veterans of Foreign Wars, the Disabled American Veterans, the Congressional Medal of Honor Society, and the Connecticut Veterans Memorial Commission. Buddy has 4 children and 3 grandchildren and lives in Richfield, Connecticut, happily with his wife, Cynthia. Please give a warm Middlesex welcome for Captain Buddy Bucha.
Thank you very much. Please sit down. Thank you. Thank you very much. Please, thank you. Please. Thank you. Thank you very much. I accept that on behalf of my men. Were they here, you would meet some of the most impressive Americans that this country's ever produced. So on their behalf, thank you very much. I normally would take this medal off because I have a tendency to get political in what I speak about. And I have 10 men on a black shiny wall in Washington. whose political beliefs I would have no way of knowing. And therefore, since this medal belongs to them as much as any of the other men in the unit, I always take it off in respect for their opinions, whatever they might have been. But today, I'm not going to get political in a way of partisan politics, although I do criticize people from both parties. I rarely praise them. Although having had a day named for me, I'll give the governor a pass today. I also have to clarify something so they don't look for me coming through Middletown. I commute oftentimes to Stonington and also to Warwick, Rhode Island. I've gone to Warwick because that happens to be the deployment spot for a brigade of civil affairs that covers all of New England. I think it's the 344 Civil Affairs Group. And I was asked by a lieutenant to come to his commissioning ceremony of the National Guard, and I said, of course I'll do that. And when the colonel found out I was coming, he changed it. I had to speak at a deployment group, which was much larger. And now I've decided that that's a group I'm going to say goodbye to each time they depart the country, because I came to understand what we were doing with these young men and women. They go in 2- and 3-person teams to the most remote villages to build dams, help correct waterways, and they go without support. Now think about that. 400 kilometers from the nearest friendly, and they're out teaching people how to build a dam and how to maybe improve their schools. And they are a reserve unit. And one of the sergeants who was showing me around, I said, well, what do you do in real life? He said, well, I'm a senior partner at one of the largest law firms in Providence. And he was serving as an E5. Turned down the appointment as a JAG because he wanted to serve with soldiers in the best way he knew how, and that was to go out to these remote villages. He goes without being heralded, and he returns in an ominous position that none of us would know who he is. And I decided if a group can serve this country without applause, without credit, in the far reaches of the Middle East, they deserve to have someone come there who's not a member of their community to say thank you. I bring that out as an example because there are countless organizations like that that depart every day from little villages and river cities of America, from the plains, the mountains, the desert towns, and they go to these far-off places serving us. No one says thank you when they go, and because of the way they return, no one's there to say thank you when they come home. But there's something we can all do for them. And that has to do with the environment in which we find ourselves today. We have an economy that's being pressed from all sides. We find people unemployed for 24, 25, 26 months, living only on unemployment benefits, and they read in the paper where some might say that's too much to give them. Yet the rest of the world looks at this country as the mother lode, the opportunity for their economies. They come here, if anyone can crack into the United States to sell us things, they know that they will be successful, because this engine of demand that we have here, the world's largest economy, gives them the ability to build their corporations and place their people at work. One of the things we could do is, why not we turn this engine around and have it start consuming the products and goods made by Americans today? And let's turn this engine that the rest of the world looks at with such admiration, let's turn it to good use for this country, so that these kids and people who come back serving us find that there are jobs waiting for them, so that when they come home we say thank you by saying here's a job, as opposed to here's a box. And you think about it. How many of you go to a store and never look to see where something was made? I did it a few years ago. I said, I wonder where things are made. And I found all these pastas on the shelf, and I looked at each one of them. Yes, some were made in America, some were made in Italy. But 2 or 3 of the brands, and I was told the best sellers, were made in Turkey. I don't want pasta from Turkey. As I told Brad on his radio show this morning, another one said, fresh, I have to work hard at this, make sure I don't screw up the words, fresh, flash, frozen, Gulf shrimp. You've seen the frozen shrimp in the lockers at the food stores? Pull it out and see where it was from. When it says Gulf shrimp, you all think it's from Louisiana, right? America's shrimp capital, the shrimp capital of the world. No. This thing was flash frozen in Ecuador. Now, think about it. Do you want anything flash frozen in Ecuador thawed out in your kitchen? I don't. Yet there are ships down in Louisiana that are staying at dock because there isn't a demand for the product, for the American Gulf shrimp. And you can go on and on and on. For example, some of you bought dog food till you realized that if you gave it to your dog, the dog might die. Where was that dog food from? China. It points out they lack the quality controls that we insist. Later on, it became known that people were using toothpaste and their teeth were falling out and they were becoming very sick. Where was it made? China. So if there's anything that you ingest, it shouldn't be from China. But we don't think about that. We walk in and say, can I save a nickel? Can I save a penny? That's the price of your safety? A penny or a nickel? So we should leave these gatherings at a time like this committed to doing something to help this country. President Kennedy said, not ask what we can do for you, but ask what you can do for us. He encourages us to think about each other. You gather today not to honor yourselves, but to honor others. Well, honor others by taking advantage of the privilege and power you have of how you spend your money. My hope is before Christmas, across this nation, we can say for 1 week, as you go about spending that money to celebrate the holidays, that you spend it only on things made in the great nation of the United States of America. And if you do that, these employment numbers won't be 90,000 hired, 100,000 fired. It'll be 200, 300, 400,000 hired. Why? To meet the demand of the engine of consumption of America. Now, why do I talk about this on Veterans Day? I was just recently appointed chairman of a committee in the Department of Labor for Veterans Employment and Training. 18 members of the committee, people from all of the major VSOs, from the Chamber of Commerce, and we're gathered together to see how can we do things to ensure that veterans are employed. And everybody told me, says, well, you know, that's the problem. The government can't do anything. Well, last week when I was down in Washington, I met a group, 8 people from the state of Missouri. Happens to be a place I graduated from high school. And I asked them, I said, how many jobs did you place? And this young lady, this little African-American lady, said, well, sir, it's not that simple. And I figured, oh, she's going to explain to me that they didn't hire anybody. She said, we only report our statistics on a quarterly basis. So since we're mid-quarter, I can't give you the results yet for this quarter. But last quarter in the state of Missouri, we placed 60% of the veterans who came to our door. And I said, well, I wonder how many that might be. She said 9,000. 9,000. And the Chamber of Commerce is here today, and I started thinking, my God, that means there are jobs. There are jobs available. And if this team could place 9,000, think of the 50 states. Missouri's probably average. Just think how many people would be hired if everybody just did what they did. And then I started thinking there's 272,000 firms in the United States of America, probably all members of the Chamber, who do business with the federal government. I would like every contract officer in every department of the government to call whatever companies he or she manages the contracts for and say, starting today, you've got 2 weeks to send me the name of a veteran you just hired. 1. That's 272,000 veterans that could be done in 2 weeks. And then warn them that you're going to get another call in another month. And if you have more than 50 employees, we're going to start asking you to hire 2 veterans. And if you have more than 100, we're going to ask you to hire 4 veterans. If you have thousands of people, we're going to say, I want 1,000 during this year. Let's put the country back to work. That's what we owe these kids. They went to a land whose language they do not speak, a location they couldn't find on a map, and whose culture they did not understand. Why? Because they trusted in our wisdom. That is something we needed of this generation of Americans. They trusted us so that we could be the guardians of this wonderful country and the economy we have. And when they return, is it right for us to say there's no room at the inn? Is it right for us to say, I'm sorry, there's no job for you? Is it right for us to see veterans of this era living in boxes under bridges? There was a man on television who said, well, his name was O'Reilly, he said, there are no homeless veterans. I went to a homeless shelter and didn't see any veterans. Well, they're not going to be wearing a uniform. But you can go to Linda Schwartz's once a year and see 1,200 veterans coming in there as the last respite of health care, dental care, and a checkup. Why? Because they are homeless. They are hurting. They're in need. And she runs this stand down every year. If you want to go there and see what your state is doing and what your country is doing for people, but at the same time see those in need, you go to that stand down where they pick up used clothing that was given to them, blankets, because they know they're going to be cold. They go in a room and wait with the nurses who had to be trained how to ask them to let them be examined, because they don't go to doctors. There is no health care for the homeless. Now, why is this important to me? I'm going to tell you something. 2 stories. One, when I came home from Vietnam, I was the only officer on a civilian airplane, Seaborne Airways. The guys at that table know who they are. You loaded on a plane, and there we were, the dusty, dirty, long-haired veterans of combat. We all had that slouch. My wife accused me of still having it. And you didn't care. Why? You were hardcore. You'd survived the year. When you reported in, you went to the unit and you said, hey, how's everybody? Who's been here 12 months? And nobody had been there 12 months. He said, how many been here 10 months? Nobody had been there 10 months. You started thinking, well, wait a minute. If I got to serve a year and there's no one in this unit that served a year, where the heck they go? Well, they came home before the year was up, wounded or dead. So when you survived that year, you were proud deep down inside, but you were still hardcore, so you were sloppy. And they were in that plane, packed. And I was in the back, the only officer. And I looked at these guys and I said, they're like my guys. Tough. But they didn't care. And they said 30 minutes to touchdown at Travis Air Force Base, and all of a sudden the backs of the seats went up. Guys started reaching into their bags, pulling out rags, dusting off white, they should have been black, jungle boots, white from the mud and the water, dusting off their fatigues, tucking their hair behind their ears so it didn't look quite as bad. And then I saw medals coming out on their chests. And that one, the blue bar with the rifle and the wreath, the combat infantryman's badge, was meant I was in combat for 45 days. Not 1 hour, not 3 days, as is in my citation, but 45 days. And they pinned that on their fatigues. And I said, this is different. They are proud, because they're coming home. The plane landed, they opened the door, and the first thing we heard out of that cold November night was a loudspeaker that said, all right, knock off the noise. Enlisted men on the left, officers on the right, will get you out of here as soon as possible. And I saw the slouch come back. The line of soldiers in front of me, all of a sudden it wasn't, we're coming home. Just one more step on the way to and from war. And then I saw a funny thing. In the front of the line, I saw a guy turn around. And he was hugging the person behind him. And he came all the way down the line, and the guy in front of me turned around and said, "Welcome home, sir, I love you." And I turned around to the little combat medic behind me, wearing his silver star. And he reached up and he hugged me and he said, "Sir, welcome home, I love you." Little did I know that that same thing was going on at all the ports and all the airports to which young men and women sent to war were returning. They were thanking each other because no one else was there to thank them. And they went on to build their own memorial, to give their own parades. They also took a vow that never again would kids come back to this country, having done all the country asked of them, except they did not die. Never again would those young men and women come home and not have a nation there to embrace them and to look to their needs and ensure that the benefits that they were promised when they raised their right hand would be delivered. That's why we have to do this on Veterans Day. They are entitled to it. And we have to roll back this movement that's catching foot, that somehow the men and women who decide to serve in our military as their career, their retirement benefits are too high. When I was in the military, my pay was $220 a month. I got promoted to captain. I got $440. When I went to Fort Campbell, I found out, and I just never even thought of it, that the PFCs were receiving $16 a month. But they got 3 square meals, although they came in a round can. They were given a shelter, even though it might be a poncho, while they lay knee-deep in a rice paddy. But they were promised benefits if they were to survive. And if you make it a career and give us 20 years, even you generals that have 4-star jobs, that have millions of employees and billions, your top pay of $139,000 a year compared to the millions that are paid in the civilian world won't matter, because you have retirement benefits that are guaranteed and health benefits that go along with them. Sacrifice now, but we will take care of you then. That's a contract. That's a contract of America with the men and women who wear the uniform of this country. And just because you're a politician and don't want to vote on how to turn this country around, you don't have a right to say to those men and women, "We are taking your benefits." So today, let's leave here dedicated to one thing. Let's lead our lives in a fashion that is worthy of the sacrifices the men and women who wear the uniform of this country make for us. And when we see a veteran this week, or any week, don't slap them on the back and say, "Thank you for your service," and then rush off to something far more important. The Budweiser ad you've seen on TV, where when the troops come into the airport, everybody stands up and claps. It lasts 15 seconds. Why? In the 16th second, we sit down and start reading our newspaper again. That's better than it was during Vietnam, but that's not adequate. All of us were given one thing in our life that's finite. One thing. It's not our money or our stuff. As Willie Nelson said when he lost all his stuff, and they said, "How do you feel about it?" He says, "It's just stuff. I'll get more stuff. I'll probably lose it too, and then I'll get more stuff." It's not money. We know that. You can make money and lose money overnight. You're rich and you're poor, and money comes and goes. We have one thing that's truly finite and therefore precious, and that's our time. The time we have to share with one another. The time we have to go to those young men and women wearing the uniform today and say, thank you for the service. Where are you from? What do you do? Do you have a wife or husband? Do you have kids? How are they doing? You have time to give them, to show them you care. And time is critical. And if you don't have time, bad things can happen. And as a closing anecdote, I want you to listen to a story of a Medal of Honor recipient named Dwight Johnson. Dwight was drafted out of the ghettos of Detroit during Vietnam. A time, and I would remind you that in 1967 we had the 101st Airborne, the 82nd Airborne, and countless military units patrolling the streets of the towns and cities of this country as we work to perfect our democracy. So let's not be so impatient with those countries to whom we've just introduced democracy for not getting it right. Out of that cauldron, that crucible, Dwight joined the United States Army. Not necessarily because he wanted to, but because his number was low. He went to Vietnam and received the Medal of Honor. Severely wounded, we sent him back to Valley Forge. And as we have in a very funny and callous way about us, once a week you would be dressed up, his medal put around his neck, and he'd be taken to an American Legion post, a VFW post, to be honored. And that would be his moment in the sun. And then they'd take him back to the hospital. And then they would take him out again, and he'd have one more shining moment. Until he was determined to be well enough to be discharged, and then he was discharged back to Detroit. Got married, and joined all the other countless African-American young men in that city looking for a job. Unemployed, but nonetheless responsible for his wife and the hoped-for family that they would build. His wife became pregnant, and Dwight took her by borrowing the car of a friend. He took her to the hospital because she was having a miscarriage, and he was scared because he had seen what blood represents and the eventual safety of the person who's bleeding. And he went to the hospital and he said, "My wife's dying, I think. She's bleeding." They went into the triage room, and the medic said, "No problem, I'll take care of it. Just go in there in that room and see him. We've got hold of your wife, no problem." He got into the back room, and the man said, "Do you have a credit card?" He said, "Sir, I don't have a job. How could I have a credit card?" He said, "Well, you got $50? He said, "Look, I got a wife dying in there. I don't have $50. I don't have a credit card. I got a wife." The man said, "Sorry, I can't do anything for you. You have to go somewhere else." That's all he asked. $50 for a credit card. Didn't have the time to say, "Who are you? Where are you from? What have you done?" Too busy. Go. Dwight got back in the car, drove his wife back to his friend. To the man he borrowed the car from, he said, "Can I borrow your gun?" He said, "Why?" I said, "Don't ask questions, just give me the damn gun." Went down to a liquor store and put the gun in the face of the man and said, "Give me $50. Not all your money, $50. The man opened up the drawer, pulled out a gun, and shot him dead on the spot. Think about it. A recipient of the Medal of Honor. But nobody had the time to ask him, "What can I do for you?" No one had the time to say, "Here's $50. Let me help you take care of your wife." And the problem is, we have come as a society to worship the emblems of success. It is the medal that we honor. It's the trophy we have, the badge we wear. We don't have the time to learn about the person behind the trophy. This medal costs $15 to make. But when you meet Dakota Myers, the youngest kid, he's what's important, not the medal. And when you meet the sergeant wearing 3 stripes, it's he or she that's important, not the stripes. But to do that, you have to take time to care. So today, as we approach Veterans Day, take the time. See the people on your left and right and ask them about themselves. How many live in a community you don't even know the person across the street? Ask them how they're doing. Join hands and take care of each other. Lift this country up. Remember that these kids carried us on their back. They took an oath to do it, and on the other side of that oath was that we owe them our time and everything that we promised them, for them to be willing to lay down their life in service to this magnificent country. That's Veterans Day. It's time for each nation and each citizen to say thank you and take the time to care. God bless you all, and thank you for having me.